Subscribe to StoryLab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Staff Sergeant Sean Marsh wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished his perimeter check of the forward operating base in Afghanistan. The desert sun was merciless, but he'd grown accustomed to it during his third deployment. At 38, Sean was a career soldier with 15 years of service under his belt, a man forged by discipline, honor, and an unwavering sense of justice. His calloused hands bore the scars of countless missions, and his steel-gray eyes had seen more combat than most men twice his age. But beneath the hardened exterior beat the heart of a devoted father. Every night, he looked at the photo of his 15-year-old daughter Tracy taped to his footlocker, her bright smile and auburn hair a reminder of what he was fighting for. Sean had joined the military straight out of high school after his own father, a decorated Vietnam veteran, passed away from cancer. The discipline and structure had given him purpose, but it was Tracy's birth that had given him meaning. Her mother, Shelby, had been his high school sweetheart, but their marriage hadn't survived the strain of military life. The divorce 2 years ago had been amicable. They both wanted what was best for Tracy. When Shelby remarried Gilbert Sparks 6 months ago, Sean had reservations. Something about the man fell off during their brief meeting, but Shelby seemed happy, and Tracy needed stability while he was deployed. Gilbert was the mayor's son, successful in real estate, and seemed to provide the comfortable life Sean's military salary couldn't offer. Now, as he settled into his bunk for what should have been a routine evening, the satellite phone's harsh ring shattered the desert quiet. "Sergeant Marsh," he answered, expecting a call from his commanding officer. "Sean, this is Dr. Roberto Wood from Riverside General Hospital." The voice was tense, professional, but carried an undertone that made Sean's blood run cold. "Doctor, is this about?" "Your daughter's in the hospital," Dr. Wood interrupted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Her stepfather, the mayor's son, did this. The cops won't even file a report." He paused, and Sean could hear the frustration and helplessness bleeding through the phone. "I'm sorry, Sean. She won't get any justice." The satellite phone felt heavy in Sean's hand as the words sank in. The desert around him seemed to fade away, replaced by a cold, focused rage that he'd only felt in combat. "How bad?" "Broken ribs, concussion, internal bruising. She's stable, but—" Dr. Wood's voice cracked. "She's asking for you." Sean's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth might crack. "I'm coming home." "Sean, be careful. The Sparks family owns this town. The mayor, the police chief, half the city council. They're all in each other's pockets." After hanging up, Sean sat in the darkness of his bunk, staring at Tracy's photo. His fellow soldiers had learned to give him space when he got that look, the same expression he wore before leading a high-risk mission. But this wasn't about enemy combatants or military objectives. This was about his daughter, and someone was going to pay. He packed his gear methodically, his movements sharp and efficient. The emergency leave paperwork would be processed within hours. His commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, was a father himself and understood the urgency. As Sean folded his uniform, his fingers brushed against his father's Purple Heart, kept in a small wooden box. His father had taught him that some fights were worth everything, and protecting family was the most sacred duty of all. The flight home would take 36 hours with connections, but Sean's mind was already working, planning, calculating. Gilbert Sparks had made the biggest mistake of his life, and Sean Marsh was coming home with one mission in his head. He won't be seeing the next sunrise. Chapter 2. Homecoming. The fluorescent lights of Riverside General Hospital cast harsh shadows as Sean strode through the corridors, still wearing his desert combat uniform. Nurses and visitors stepped aside, sensing the controlled fury radiating from the battle-hardened soldier. He'd been traveling for 34 hours straight, but adrenaline and paternal rage kept him sharp. Dr. Roberto Wood was waiting outside Tracy's room, a man in his 50s with graying temples and kind eyes that couldn't hide his anger. "Sean," he said, extending his hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "How is she?" Sean's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle. Physically, she'll heal. But Sean, doctor would place a hand on his shoulder. She's not the same girl who used to come to my office for checkups. He broke something inside her. Sean pushed open the door and felt his heart shatter. Tracy lay in the hospital bed, her vibrant auburn hair matted, her face a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. Her left eye was swollen shut, and her breathing was shallow from the broken ribs. But it was the hollow look in her visible eye that nearly brought him to his knees. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper. Sean crossed the room in 3 strides, gently taking her hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Tracy began to cry. Not the tears of physical pain, but the broken sobs of a child whose world had been destroyed. He said no one would believe me, that you were too far away to help. "Tell me what happened." Sean's voice was calm, but Dr. Wood could see the storm building behind his eyes. Through halting words and tears, Tracy explained how Gilbert's behavior had changed after the honeymoon period ended. The verbal abuse escalated to shoving, then to the beating that landed her in the hospital. When she tried to call the police, Gilbert had shown her his phone, pictures of him with the police chief, the district attorney, city councilman. "He owns them all, Daddy. Mom's scared too, but she won't leave. She says we have nowhere to go." After Tracy fell asleep, Dr. Wood led Sean to his office. "I've been practicing medicine in this town for 20 years, he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "I've seen what the Sparks family does to people who cross them. Business owners bankrupted, families forced to move, careers destroyed. What about my ex-wife? Shelby's terrified. Gilbert convinced her that if she leaves or talks, he'll make sure she loses custody of Tracy permanently. Judge Morrison is his golf buddy." Dr. Wood pulled out a manila folder. "I've been documenting everything, photos, medical records, statements, but without witnesses willing to testify or cops willing to investigate." Sean studied the contents of the folder, his strategic mind cataloging every detail. "You said the mayor's dirty too?" Norman Sparks has been running this town like his personal kingdom for 12 years. His son Gilbert is being groomed to take over the family empire. Real estate, construction contracts, city council seats. They own Riverside. What about federal authorities? Dr. Wood shook his head. "I tried reaching out to the FBI 6 months ago about some suspicious construction contracts. My inquiry disappeared into a black hole. I suspect they have connections there too." Sean closed the folder and looked out the window at the town he'd grown up in. It looked peaceful, prosperous even, but now he saw it for what it was, a carefully constructed facade hiding corruption and abuse. "Roberto," he said, using the doctor's first name for the first time, "I'm going to need your help. Anything." Gilbert Sparks thinks he's untouchable because he owns the local system, but he's never faced someone who operates outside that system. Sean's eyes hardened. "I've spent 15 years learning how to take down enemies who think they're safe behind walls and allies. This is just another mission." Dr. Wood leaned forward. "What do you need?" "Information. Schedules, habits, relationships. And I'll need people I can trust, others who've been hurt by the Sparks family. There's a support group that meets at St. Mary's Church. Families who've been destroyed by Norman and Gilbert's corruption. The pastor, Wade Joseph, has been fighting them for years." Sean stood, his decision made. "Set up a meeting. It's time the people of Riverside learned what real justice looks like." As he walked back to Tracy's room, Sean felt the familiar calm that settled over him before mission. Gilbert Sparks had declared war on his family. Now he was about to learn why Sergeant Sean Marsh had earned 3 combat action badges and a reputation as one of the most effective soldiers in his regiment. The war was coming home. Chapter 3. Gathering the Storm. St. Mary's Church sat on the outskirts of Riverside, its weathered brick facade bearing witness to decades of Sunday services and community gatherings. But tonight, in the basement meeting room, Pastor Wade Joseph was hosting a different kind of congregation, the victims of the Sparks family's reign of terror. Sean arrived precisely at 9 p.m., having spent the day with Tracy and gathering intelligence on Gilbert's routine. The basement was dimly lit, with a circle of folding chairs occupied by 8 people whose faces told stories of loss and frustration. Pastor Wade Joseph stood as Sean entered, a tall, lean man in his 60s with calloused hands and fire in his eyes. "You must be Sean. Roberto told me about your daughter." "I'm sorry." The introductions went around the circle, each person sharing their story of how the Sparks family had destroyed their lives. There was Amy McElroy, whose family restaurant was shut down after she refused to pay protection money disguised as licensing fees. Keith Lee, a contractor whose business was blacklisted after he witnessed Norman Sparks taking kickbacks on a city project. Corinne Bates, a teacher who was fired for trying to report that Gilbert was supplying drugs to high school students. "How long has this been going on?" Sean asked. "Norman started small, 20 years ago," Pastor Joseph explained. "City council position, then mayor. Gilbert's been his enforcer since he turned 18. Now he's 35 and completely untouchable." Corinne leaned forward. "We've tried everything legal. Complaints, petitions, even hiring lawyers. They either get bought off or threatened. 3 families have left town in the past year alone," Amy added. "The Sparks family doesn't just silence you, they erase you." Sean processed this information, his military mind recognizing a classic occupation scenario. "What about their vulnerabilities? Everyone has weaknesses." Keith Lee spoke up. "Gilbert's got a temper when he drinks. Hangs out at the Riverside Country Club most Friday nights. Drives home drunk regularly, but somehow never gets pulled over. Norman's been embezzling city funds through shell construction companies," Pastor Joseph added. "But the evidence is locked up tighter than Fort Knox. What about allies? Anyone in positions of authority who isn't compromised?" The room fell silent until a new voice spoke from the back. "Maybe me." Everyone turned to see a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and tired eyes. She stepped into the light, wearing a police officer's uniform. "Officer Janice Estrada," she introduced herself. "I've been fighting this corruption from the inside for 2 years. Most of my department is either bought or scared, but there are a few of us trying to do the right thing." Sean studied her carefully. In the military, you learn to read people quickly, their motivations, their reliability, their breaking points. Officer Estrada had the look of someone who'd seen too much but refused to give up. "Why should we trust you?" Amy challenged. "You're part of the system. Because 3 months ago, Gilbert Sparks raped my partner's 16-year-old daughter, and the chief buried the report." Janice's voice was steady, but her hands shook with anger. She transferred to another state because she couldn't stand being in the same town as him. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Sean held up his hand for silence. "What kind of access do you have?" "Limited, but I can move around town without suspicion. I know Gilbert's schedule, his habits, his weaknesses." She paused. "And I know where Norman keeps his real records, the ones that would bring down their entire operation." Pastor Joseph leaned back in his chair. "Sean, what exactly are you planning?" Sean stood and walked to the small basement window, looking out at the town lights. "In the military, we call it asymmetric warfare. When you can't fight an enemy head-on, you find their weak points and exploit them. You turn their strength against them." He turned back to the group. "Gilbert thinks his power comes from his connections, his father's influence, his ability to intimidate people. But what if all of that disappeared? What if he found himself completely alone, facing consequences for the first time in his life?" "You're talking about vigilante justice," Corinne said nervously. "I'm talking about justice, period." Sean's voice carried the authority of command. "The system failed my daughter and all your families. Sometimes you have to create your own system." Janice stepped forward. "What do you need from me?" "Information. Gilbert's routine, his security, his favorite places. And when the time comes, I need you to be ready to act fast." Over the next hour, they planned the initial phase of what Sean privately called Operation Cleanup. Each person would have a role, gathering intelligence, creating alibis, documenting evidence. But Sean made one thing clear. He would be the tip of the spear. If anyone was going to cross legal lines, it would be him. As the meeting broke up, Pastor Joseph pulled Sean aside. "Son, I know you're angry. We all are. But don't let revenge consume you." Sean clasped the older man's shoulder. "This isn't about revenge, Pastor. It's about justice. And sometimes justice requires a soldier." Driving back to the hotel where he was staying, Sean felt the familiar anticipation that came before a mission. Gilbert Sparks had built his life on the assumption that power and connections made him untouchable. He was about to learn that a father protecting his daughter was the most dangerous enemy of all. Phase 1 would begin tomorrow. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Sean spent the next 3 days conducting surveillance on Gilbert Sparks with the methodical precision of a military intelligence operation. He rented a nondescript sedan and positioned himself at various vantage points throughout Riverside, documenting Gilbert's routine with the same attention to detail he'd used tracking Taliban leaders in Afghanistan. Gilbert's patterns were predictable, the arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Mornings at his real estate office, lunch at Romano's restaurant with various city officials, afternoons touring construction sites where his family's companies held lucrative contracts. Evenings were split between the country club and more private meetings in the back rooms of establishments he controlled. On Thursday morning, Sean watched from across the street as Gilbert emerged from his office building, talking loudly on his phone about keeping the teachers in line and making sure that new construction contract goes through. The man was 6'2", soft around the middle from years of comfortable living, with perfectly styled brown hair and expensive suits. But Sean could see the weakness beneath the facade. Gilbert had never been in a real fight, never faced genuine danger. That afternoon, Sean met with Dr. Wood at a small diner outside town. The doctor slid a manila envelope across the table. Medical records going back 5 years, Dr. Wood said quietly. 3 other girls who came in with suspicious injuries. All of them had connections to Gilbert. All of them were too scared to talk. Sean studied the photographs and reports. The pattern was clear. Gilbert escalated from verbal abuse to physical violence over time. Why didn't anyone report this? One girl's family tried. Her father was a plumber who did work for the city. Within a week, his business license was revoked, his contracts canceled. They moved to Oregon within a month. Dr. Wood's voice was bitter. The others got the message. That evening, Sean met Officer Janice Estrada at a 24-hour diner near the highway. She wore civilian clothes and looked exhausted. "I've been digging into the department's files," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. Internal communications, complaint reports that were buried, evidence that mysteriously disappeared. It's all there. How did you get this without raising suspicion? Night shifts and a lot of careful copying when the chief wasn't around. My partner, Officer Lee Levine, has been helping. He's one of the few honest cops left. She paused. There's something else. Gilbert's planning something for this weekend. Sean leaned forward. What kind of something? I overheard Chief Morrison talking to him about handling the hospital situation. They're worried Dr. Wood might keep pushing the issue with your daughter's case. A cold fury settled over Sean's features. When and where? Saturday night. Gilbert likes to handle his dirty work personally, makes him feel powerful. He'll probably wait until late, when there are fewer witnesses around the hospital. Sean made his decision. Then we move first. Friday evening, Sean put his plan into motion. He'd identified Gilbert's one predictable vulnerability, his Friday night routine at the Riverside Country Club. Gilbert would arrive around 8, drink heavily while playing poker with other corrupt officials, then drive home drunk around midnight via the same back road he'd used for years. Sean positioned himself along that route, in a section where the road curved through dense woods with no streetlights or security cameras. At 12:15 a.m., Gilbert's silver BMW approached, weaving slightly as expected. What happened next looked like a simple accident. Sean's rental car pulled out from a side road at just the right moment, clipping Gilbert's rear bumper and sending both vehicles spinning into the grass. When Gilbert stumbled out of his BMW, drunk and furious, he found himself face-to-face with a man he didn't recognize. "You stupid piece of—" Gilbert began, then stopped as he registered Sean's military bearing and cold eyes. "Gilbert Sparks," Sean said calmly. "We need to talk. Do you know who I am? My father is the mayor of this town. I'll have you arrested for her." Sean's fist connected with Gilbert's solar plexus with surgical precision, dropping him to his knees. In 15 years of military service, Sean had learned exactly how to inflict pain without leaving obvious marks. "My name is Sean Marsh," he said as Gilbert gasped for air. "You put my daughter in the hospital." Recognition and fear flashed across Gilbert's face. He tried to crawl back toward his car, but Sean grabbed him by the shirt and hauled him upright. "Here's what's going to happen," Sean continued conversationally. "You're going to confess to everything you've done. You're going to turn yourself in to the state police. And you're going to make sure my daughter and ex-wife are never bothered again." Gilbert's alcohol-fueled courage returned as the initial shock wore off. "You're insane. I own this town. Even if you kill me, my father will destroy everyone you care about." Sean smiled, the same smile that had terrified enemy combatants in 3 different war zones. "Gilbert, you're thinking too small. I don't want to kill you. I want to destroy you completely. And I'm going to do it using everything you think makes you powerful." He released Gilbert, who stumbled backward. "Go home, sober up, and enjoy the next few days, because they're going to be your last as a free man." As Sean drove away, leaving Gilbert stranded with his damaged BMW, he felt the satisfaction of a mission's first phase completed. Gilbert would report the accident, but it would look like road rage from a stranger. More importantly, the seed of fear had been planted. The psychological warfare had begun. Chapter 5, Unraveling the Web. Monday morning brought the first signs that Sean's campaign was working. Gilbert Sparks appeared at his real estate office looking haggard and paranoid, constantly checking over his shoulder and snapping at employees who asked routine questions. The weekend encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Officer Janice Estrada monitored police communications from her desk at the station, noting that Gilbert had filed a report about the accident, but seemed reluctant to provide details. Chief Morrison was frustrated by the vague description of the other driver, but without concrete evidence of intent, there was nothing to investigate. Meanwhile, Sean was implementing Phase 2 of his plan. Using the intelligence gathered over the past week, he began systematically targeting the foundations of Gilbert's power. The first strike came Tuesday morning. Amy McElroy, the restaurant owner whose business had been destroyed years earlier, received an anonymous package containing copies of city inspection reports. The documents revealed that Gilbert's construction company had failed multiple safety inspections on city buildings, but the reports had been altered to show passing grades. More damaging were the records showing bribes paid to inspectors. By noon, Amy had delivered copies to the state attorney general's office and 3 investigative journalists at regional newspapers. The story broke Wednesday morning. Construction safety scandal rocks Riverside. Mayor's son's company linked to Gilbert's day deteriorated further when Keith Lee received similar documents revealing the shell company scheme Norman Sparks used to funnel city contracts to family businesses. Within hours, the state auditor's office announced a formal investigation into Riverside's municipal contracts. But Sean's most devastating move came Wednesday evening. Dr. Wood received a package containing recorded phone conversations between Gilbert and Chief Morrison discussing how to handle the doctor's persistent questions about Tracy's case. The recordings, obtained through methods Sean didn't explain, also captured Gilbert bragging about previous assaults that had been covered up. Thursday morning, Dr. Wood delivered the recordings to the FBI's field office in the state capitol, along with detailed medical evidence of abuse patterns spanning 5 years. By afternoon, federal agents were en route to Riverside. Gilbert's paranoia reached new heights when he realized someone was systematically dismantling his empire. He called an emergency meeting with his father at City Hall, unaware that Officer Janice Estrada was monitoring their communications. "Someone's targeting us specifically," Gilbert told his father, pacing frantically around Norman's office. The leak about the construction reports, the contract investigation, the FBI inquiry, it's all connected. Norman Sparks was a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his environment. At 68, he'd built his political machine through careful cultivation of loyalty and fear. But the current situation felt different, more coordinated than random muckraking. "Do we know who's behind it?" Norman asked. "I think it's that soldier, the girl's father. He showed up Friday night, said he was going to destroy me." Gilbert's voice cracked slightly. "He knew things, Dad. Personal things about our business." Norman frowned. One man can't do this much damage unless he has inside help. They were right, but they were also too late. Sean had spent the week building an alliance of people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from the Sparks family's downfall. Each revelation was carefully timed to create maximum chaos while making it impossible to trace back to a single source. Friday brought the next phase. Officer Lee Levine, working with Janice Estrada, discovered evidence that Chief Morrison had been accepting payments from the Sparks family for years. The evidence was actually compiled by Sean using financial records obtained through less than legal means, but it was presented as routine internal investigation. By Friday afternoon, Chief Morrison was suspended pending a federal investigation. The interim chief, Captain Roman Hancock, was one of the few honest officers remaining in the department. His first act was to reopen the investigation into Tracy's assault. Gilbert's world was collapsing, but Sean wasn't finished. The final psychological blow came Friday evening when Gilbert returned home to find his house surrounded by FBI vehicles. They weren't there to arrest him yet, but to serve search warrants related to the construction and contract investigations. As federal agents carried boxes of documents from his home office, Gilbert stood on his front lawn in full view of his neighbors, watching 15 years of carefully constructed corruption being dismantled piece by piece. Sean observed from a hill overlooking Gilbert's neighborhood, using military-grade binoculars. The man who had terrorized his daughter and countless others now looked small and frightened, finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless. But the end game was still to come. Gilbert was wounded and desperate, which made him dangerous. Cornered animals often lashed out unpredictably, and Sean needed to be ready for Gilbert's final moves. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. Saturday morning brought news that sent shockwaves through Riverside. Norman Sparks had suffered a heart attack during the night and was in intensive care at Riverside General. The timing couldn't have been worse for Gilbert, who was already dealing with multiple federal investigations and the collapse of his business empire. Sean learned about Norman's condition from Dr. Wood, who called him at dawn. "It looks legitimate," the doctor said. "Stress-induced cardiac event. He's stable but weak." For most people, a parent's medical emergency would trigger concern and family loyalty. But Gilbert's reaction revealed the depths of his selfishness. Instead of rushing to his father's bedside, he saw an opportunity to seize control of the family's assets before federal investigators could freeze them. Officer Janice Estrada monitored Gilbert's movements throughout the morning, reporting back to Sean via encrypted text messages. Gilbert had spent 3 hours at his father's attorney's office, then visited the bank where the family's main accounts were held. By noon, he was meeting with known associates from his drug distribution network, the side business that had been carefully hidden behind his legitimate real estate ventures. "He's liquidating everything," Janice texted. "Looks like he's planning to run." Sean had anticipated this possibility. A man like Gilbert would never accept defeat. He'd either fight back viciously or flee to start over somewhere else. Either option was unacceptable. That afternoon, Sean initiated the final phase of his plan. Using information provided by Corinne Bates, the fired teacher, he arranged for evidence of Gilbert's drug operation to be delivered to rival dealers in the neighboring city of Millbrook. The package included photos, addresses, and details about Gilbert's distribution network, information that would normally be worth thousands of dollars to competitors. The response was swift and predictable. By evening, Gilbert's drug operation was under attack from multiple directions. 3 of his dealers were robbed in coordinated strikes, and his main warehouse was firebombed. Gilbert's phone buzzed constantly with panic calls from associates who suddenly found themselves targets. But Sean's masterstroke came at 9 p.m. when Gilbert received a call that chilled him to the bone. The voice was distorted through a voice changer, but the message was clear. "This is what happens when you hurt innocent people. Your empire is gone. Your father's in the hospital. Your dealers are being hunted. And tomorrow, everyone in Riverside will know exactly what kind of monster you really are." Gilbert tried to trace the call, but Sean had used a burner phone purchased with cash and discarded immediately afterward. The psychological impact was more important than the technical aspects. Gilbert needed to understand that he was completely outmatched. Sunday morning brought Gilbert's final miscalculation. Desperate and enraged, he decided to strike back at the one target he thought would hurt his mysterious enemy most, Tracy. At 10 a.m., Gilbert arrived at Riverside General Hospital, claiming he needed to visit his father. But instead of going to the cardiac unit, he took the elevator to the pediatric wing where Tracy was recovering from her injuries. He never made it to her room. Sean had been expecting this move. For the past week, he'd maintained a protective watch over both Tracy and Dr. Wood, anticipating that Gilbert might lash out at them as his world collapsed. When hospital security cameras showed Gilbert heading toward the wrong floor, Sean was already in position. The confrontation took place in an empty hospital corridor, far from witnesses, but within range of security cameras that would later be mysteriously damaged. Gilbert found his path blocked by a man who no longer bothered to hide his identity or intentions. Going somewhere? Sean asked calmly. Gilbert's desperation boiled over into fury. You destroyed everything. My business, my family, my life. And for what? Some little brat who probably deserved what she got. The words were a mistake. Sean's military training had taught him to control his emotions in combat, but the insult to his daughter shattered that control. What followed was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Gilbert's expensive suit couldn't protect him from 15 years of military hand-to-hand combat training. Sean's assault was methodical, each strike designed to inflict maximum pain while avoiding fatal injury. Ribs cracked, Gilbert's nose broke with a wet snap, and his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. When it was over, Gilbert lay unconscious in a pool of his own blood, his breathing shallow but steady. Sean stood over him, feeling no satisfaction, only the cold completion of a necessary mission. Dr. Wood arrived within minutes, summoned by a coded message Sean had sent. Together, they moved Gilbert to an empty room where the doctor could treat his injuries while maintaining the fiction that he'd suffered a fall down the stairs. The cameras? Dr. Wood asked. Already handled, Sean replied, pocketing the small EMP device he'd used to disable the security system. As Gilbert regained consciousness, Sean leaned close to his ear. You're going to confess to everything. The abuse, the corruption, the drug dealing, all of it. You're going to plead guilty and serve your time quietly. Because if you don't, if you ever threaten my daughter or anyone else in this town again, I'll finish what I started here. Gilbert's eyes widened with terror as the full scope of his defeat became clear. The man who had terrorized Riverside for years was now just another broken criminal, facing justice for the first time in his life. The hunter had become the hunted, and the hunt was over. Chapter 7. Justice Served. Monday morning's headlines screamed across every newspaper in the region. Mayor's son confesses to assault, corruption charges. Gilbert Sparks, bandaged and broken, had indeed followed Sean's instructions to the letter. From his hospital bed, he provided a full confession to FBI agents, detailing years of abuse, corruption, and criminal activity. The confession created a domino effect that reverberated throughout Riverside's power structure. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued for Chief Morrison, 3 city councilmen, and half a dozen business associates. The carefully constructed network of corruption that had controlled the town for decades was collapsing in spectacular fashion. Sean sat in Tracy's hospital room, reading the newspaper aloud to his daughter. She was healing well physically, but the emotional recovery would take longer. Still, there was a spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Is it really over, Daddy? She asked. The worst part is, Sean assured her. Gilbert will go to prison for a very long time, and everyone who helped him will face justice too. Dr. Wood entered the room with a smile, the first genuine smile Sean had seen from him since this ordeal began. The FBI wants to thank you for your cooperation in their investigation, he said with meaningful emphasis on the word cooperation. Special Agent Melvin Hammond had arrived from the state capitol that morning to oversee the expanding investigation. He was a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an appreciation for results, regardless of how they were achieved. During his private conversation with Sean, he'd made it clear that he understood more about the week's events than he was officially acknowledging. Sergeant Marsh, Agent Hammond had said, It's remarkable how quickly this case came together once we had the right evidence. The state is grateful for citizens who step forward to help law enforcement. Just doing my civic duty, Sean had replied. Indeed, I trust that duty is now complete. Completely. The unspoken understanding was clear. The FBI would focus on prosecuting the criminals they'd caught, not investigating the unconventional methods that had delivered them. Tuesday brought news of Norman Sparks' resignation from the mayor's office. The old man's heart attack had been real, but his recovery was aided by the knowledge that his political career was over. Rather than face federal prosecution, he'd agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Officer Janice Estrada was promoted to acting chief of police, pending a formal election. Her first act was to purge the department of corrupt officers and begin rebuilding the public's trust. Officer Lee Levine was promoted to sergeant, recognizing his years of honest service despite the department's culture of corruption. The transformation of Riverside accelerated throughout the week. Keith Lee's construction company was awarded several city contracts that had previously been monopolized by the Sparks family. Amy McElroy reopened her restaurant with a city loan from the Economic Development Fund, money that was finally being used for its intended purpose. Corinne Bates was offered her teaching position back with a formal apology from the school board. Pastor Wade Joseph held a special service on Sunday, calling it a celebration of justice and renewal. The church was packed with people who had spent years living in fear, finally able to breathe freely. But for Sean, the most meaningful moment came Wednesday afternoon when Shelby visited Tracy's hospital room. His ex-wife looked years younger, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I owe you an apology," Shelby said to Sean. "I should have protected her. I should have left in the moment." He raised his voice to her. "You were scared," Sean replied. "He made sure you felt trapped. That's what predators do." "How did you know? How did you know exactly what to do?" Sean looked at his daughter, who was finally sleeping peacefully without nightmares. "Because protecting family is what I do. It's who I am." Shelby's divorce from Gilbert was finalized within days. Unusual speed that reflected the court's recognition of extraordinary circumstances. She'd receive a substantial settlement from Gilbert's seized assets, ensuring financial security for her and Tracy. Thursday brought the final piece of closure Sean had been waiting for. Gilbert Sparks, facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment, accepted a plea agreement. He would serve 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The agreement also included full forfeiture of his assets and a prohibition from returning to Riverside County upon any eventual release. "He'll die in prison," Agent Hammond informed Sean during their final meeting. "Men like Gilbert don't survive long in federal facilities. The other inmates don't take kindly to child abusers." Sean felt no satisfaction in that knowledge, only the grim acceptance that justice sometimes came in forms the courts couldn't provide. Friday afternoon, as Sean prepared to return to his military duties, he received an unexpected visitor. Captain Roman Hancock, the honest police officer who'd been promoted during the departmental shakeup, knocked on his hotel room door. "I wanted to thank you," Captain Hancock said, "and to give you this." He handed Sean an honorary deputy badge for Riverside County. "It's symbolic, but it represents the gratitude of everyone whose lives you saved. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what makes you a hero, Sergeant. You saw an injustice and you fixed it, regardless of the personal cost." As Sean packed his gear for the return to Afghanistan, he reflected on the events of the past 2 weeks. He'd used skills learned in service to his country to serve his family and community. The methods hadn't always been conventional, but the results spoke for themselves. Justice had been served, and Riverside was finally free. Chapter 8: New Beginnings. 2 months later, Sean received a video call from Tracy while he was back at his base in Afghanistan. The transformation was remarkable. His daughter's bruises had healed completely, and more importantly, the light had returned to her eyes. She was attending a new school in a different district and seeing a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. "Daddy, guess what?" Tracy said excitedly. "Mom got a job at the hospital working with Dr. Wood's practice, and I made the honor roll." Behind her, Sean could see their new apartment, small but bright, with none of the oppressive atmosphere that had characterized their life with Gilbert. Shelby appeared in the frame, looking healthier and more confident than she had in years. "The trial's set for next month," Shelby informed him. "Agent Hammond says with Gilbert's confession and all the evidence, it's just a formality. He'll be going away for the rest of his life." The federal investigation had indeed been thorough. Norman Sparks received 8 years in federal prison, stripped of his pension and all political honors. Chief Morrison got 12 years and permanent disbarment from law enforcement. The network of corruption that had strangled Riverside for decades was completely dismantled. Dr. Wood had been appointed to the city council in a special election, part of a wave of reformist candidates who swept into office. The town's motto was quietly changed from progress through partnership to justice and community, a subtle but meaningful shift that reflected the new values governing Riverside. But perhaps the most significant change was in the people themselves. The fear that had characterized daily life in Riverside was gone, replaced by a sense of community empowerment. People who had suffered in silence for years were now actively involved in local government, ensuring that the mistakes of the past couldn't be repeated. Officer Janice Estrada, now Chief Estrada, had implemented sweeping reforms in the police department. Body cameras were mandatory, civilian oversight was established, and a strict zero-tolerance policy for corruption was enforced. The department's relationship with the community was rebuilding slowly but steadily. Sean's role in the transformation was largely unknown to the general public. The official story credited concerned citizens and federal investigators with exposing the corruption. A few people knew the truth: Dr. Wood, Chief Estrada, Pastor Joseph, and the members of the original support group, but they kept that knowledge private. 3 months after Gilbert's arrest, Sean was awarded the Bronze Star for his military service in Afghanistan, an honor that recognized his leadership during a particularly dangerous mission that had saved the lives of 6 fellow soldiers. The ceremony was conducted at his base, but he arranged for Tracy to watch via video link. "I'm so proud of you, Daddy," she said afterward. "You're a real hero." Sean smiled, remembering the events in Riverside. Heroes come in many forms, sweetheart. Sometimes it's soldiers fighting overseas. Sometimes it's doctors protecting patients. Sometimes it's teachers standing up for students. The important thing is standing up for what's right. 6 months later, Sean completed his deployment and returned home permanently. He decided not to re-enlist, choosing instead to be present for Tracy's final years of high school. The Army had offered him a promotion and a desk job at the Pentagon, but his priorities had shifted. "Family first," he explained to his commanding officer. "I've spent 15 years serving my country. Now I want to serve my daughter." His transition to civilian life was smooth, aided by his veterans benefits and a job offer from Agent Hammond, who'd been impressed by Sean's investigative skills. The FBI could always use experienced personnel with his particular combination of military training and strategic thinking. On the first anniversary of Gilbert's arrest, the city of Riverside held a festival celebrating Community Renewal Day. The event was ostensibly about economic revitalization and civic pride, but everyone understood its deeper meaning. It was a celebration of justice and freedom. Sean attended with Tracy and Shelby, watching as the town they'd helped save enjoyed its newfound peace. Children played in parks that were now truly safe. Businesses thrived without paying protection money, and families lived without fear of retribution from corrupt officials. Chief Estrada approached them during the festival, wearing civilian clothes and accompanied by her own family. "I never properly thank you," she said to Sean. "What you did saved this town." "What we all did," Sean corrected. "It took a community to fix what was broken." As the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sean felt a deep sense of completion. His mission had been successful beyond his original objectives. He'd set out to protect his daughter and punish those who'd hurt her, but he'd ended up liberating an entire town. The festival fireworks began as darkness fell, each explosion of light reflecting off the faces of people who were finally free to celebrate without fear. Tracy leaned against her father's shoulder, secure in the knowledge that she was safe, protected, and loved. For Sean Marsh, It was the best victory celebration he'd ever experienced. Chapter 9. Full Circle. 1 year after the Riverside reforms began, life had settled into a new rhythm of normalcy and hope. Sean had established himself as a respected member of the community, working as a security consultant for local businesses while serving on the City Council's Public Safety Committee. His experience with both military operations and investigative work made him invaluable in helping Riverside build sustainable safeguards against future corruption. Tracy, now 16, had blossomed into a confident young woman. The trauma of Gilbert's abuse hadn't disappeared, but with counseling and the security of knowing her abuser was imprisoned for life, she'd found ways to heal and grow stronger. She'd become an advocate for other abuse victims, working with Dr. Wood and a victims' rights organization to establish a support network that hadn't existed before. "I want to study criminal justice in college," she told Sean one evening as they worked on her college applications. "Maybe become a prosecutor or FBI agent. Help other families the way you helped ours." Sean felt immense pride watching his daughter channel her experience in a purpose. "You'll make an excellent agent," he said. "You understand what victims go through, and you have the strength to fight for them." The ripple effects of the Riverside cleanup continued to spread beyond the town's borders. Agent Hammond had used the case as a template for investigating similar corruption in other small towns, leading to arrests and reforms across 3 states. The methods Sean had employed, psychological warfare, systematic intelligence gathering, and strategic alliance building, were being studied and adapted by law enforcement agencies dealing with entrenched corruption. Dr. Wood had been elected mayor in a landslide victory, running on a platform of transparency and community empowerment. His first act was to establish citizen oversight committees for all major city functions, ensuring that no individual or family could again accumulate the kind of unchecked power the Sparks family had wielded. Chief Estrada's police reforms had become a model for other departments. Crime rates in Riverside had dropped dramatically, not because of aggressive enforcement, but because the community trusted law enforcement enough to cooperate with investigations. The fear that had kept people silent was gone, replaced by confidence that justice would be served fairly. Gilbert Sparks himself had become a cautionary tale within the federal prison system. Initially defiant and expecting his family's influence to somehow reach him even behind bars, he'd quickly learned that money and connections meant nothing in federal custody. Multiple assault charges from other inmates had resulted in extended solitary confinement, effectively ensuring he would spend his remaining years isolated and forgotten. Norman Sparks had died of a second heart attack 18 months into his prison sentence. The man who'd once controlled an entire town died alone in a federal medical facility, unmourned and unremembered except as a symbol of corruption defeated. On a warm spring evening, Sean stood on the hospital rooftop where Dr. Wood often went to think and reflect. The doctor joined him there, 2 men who'd formed an unlikely partnership in pursuit of justice. "Do you ever regret it?" Dr. Wood asked. "The way we handle things?" Sean considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system failed so completely that vigilante action became the only option. But I don't regret protecting my daughter or saving this town." The FBI agent who interviewed me last week said our case is being used to train federal investigators. They're calling it the Riverside Model, how to dismantle institutional corruption using coordinated civilian intelligence and strategic pressure. "As long as they also teach the importance of rebuilding afterward," Sean replied. "Destroying corruption is only half the battle. You have to create something better to replace it." Their conversation was interrupted by Tracy's arrival on the rooftop. She'd gotten her driver's license and was becoming increasingly independent, though she still preferred spending evenings with her father when possible. "Mom's making dinner," she announced. She wanted me to invite Dr. Wood too. Over the past year, Sean and Shelby had grown close again, not romantically, but as partners in raising their daughter and building new lives. They'd both changed during their respective ordeals, becoming stronger and more focused on what truly mattered. As they walked to Shelby's apartment, Tracy slipped her hand into Sean's, something she hadn't done since childhood, but had started doing again as her sense of security returned. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I'm glad you came home." "I'm glad I could help," Sean replied. "I don't just mean when I was hurt. I mean permanently. Having you here makes everything feel safe." That evening, as they shared dinner with Dr. Wood and discussed Tracy's college plans, Sean reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, he'd been a career soldier focused primarily on duty and mission accomplishment. Now he was a father, community leader, and protector who understood that the most important battles weren't always fought on foreign soil. The satellite phone call that had changed everything seemed like a lifetime ago. The man who'd returned from Afghanistan, driven by rage and vengeance, had evolved into someone who fought for justice and healing. The mission that began with a desire to destroy his daughter's abuser had ultimately created something positive and lasting. As the evening wound down and Dr. Wood prepared to leave, he pulled Sean aside one final time. "The victim support group is meeting tomorrow night," he said. "New members, families from other towns who heard about what we accomplished here. They're asking if you'd be willing to share your story." Sean nodded. Some fights are worth repeating. Later that night, after Tracy had gone to bed and Shelby had finished cleaning up, Sean sat alone on the apartment balcony, looking out over Riverside. The town looked peaceful in the moonlight, streetlights illuminating safe neighborhoods, businesses displaying open signs without fear of extortion, families walking freely without looking over their shoulders. In the distance, he could see the construction site where the new community center was being built with funds recovered from the Sparks family seized assets. Next to it, the groundbreaking had begun for affordable housing that would help working families who'd been priced out by the previous administration's corrupt development policies. Sean's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Hammond. "New corruption case in Millfield, 3 counties over. Similar pattern to Riverside. Interested in consulting?" He typed back, "Send me the details." Some missions never truly ended. They just evolved into new phases. Sean Marsh had found his post-military calling, protecting communities and families from the kind of corruption and abuse that had nearly destroyed his own. The skills he'd learned as a soldier were being put to use as a guardian of justice, ensuring that other fathers wouldn't receive the kind of phone call that had changed his life. Standing on that balcony, watching over the town he'd helped save, Sean felt the deep satisfaction that came from a mission truly accomplished. Justice had been served, healing had begun, and the future looked bright for everyone who called Riverside home. The war was... This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.